911, what's your emergency?
He's under! He's not surfacing! The shark grabbed him! Oh, God!
Is he still visible? Can you see the diver?
No. He went down and there's blood. We can't get to him.
Steve Morgan, a seasoned diver and marine conservationist, was killed during a routine dive by the very shark he once called his best friend. If stories like this make you think twice about the line between love and wild instinct, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Steve Morgan wasn't just a marine biologist, was a man obsessed, revered, and sometimes ridiculed for what he called his radical empathy with sharks. At 43, with more than 2 decades spent studying the behavior of apex predators, Morgan had become a fixture in the world of marine conservation, particularly through his Bahamas-based nonprofit, the Blue Depths Initiative. His mission was clear: change the world's perception of sharks from mindless killers to sentient beings capable of affection, loyalty, and even trust. The crown jewel of his crusade was Roxy, a 12-foot female tiger shark he first tagged and tracked 7 years earlier. What began as simple observation evolved into something far more intimate, at least in Morgan's eyes. He spoke of her not as a subject, but a partner. Roxy, he claimed, recognized him, responded to his energy, and displayed non-aggressive body language around him that she never showed others. Hundreds of hours of footage seemed to support this. Viral clips from the initiative's YouTube channel showed Morgan swimming inches from her gaping maw, placing his hand gently on her snout and guiding her movements with subtle gestures. In one now infamous segment, he drifted beside her without tanks, free diving as her dorsal fin brushed past his chest like an affectionate nudge. These were the images that earned him headlines as the Shark Whisperer. He dismissed cages as cowardly. He refused to dive with backup divers. He fed her by hand, ungloved, claiming that Roxy understood the difference between him and prey. His mantra, repeated in dozens of interviews and conference talks, was simple: if you treat them with love, they return it. He viewed fear as the greatest danger in the water, not the animals. But not everyone agreed. Fellow marine scientists raised red flags behind closed doors, worried that Morgan's approach was less about data and more about delusion. Some privately accused him of anthropomorphizing, projecting human emotions onto a wild predator governed by instinct, hunger, and seasonal aggression. One researcher wrote anonymously in a marine biology journal, "Morgan is confusing compliance with comprehension. Sharks respond to patterns, not friendship." Still, none could deny the results 7 years without incident, and a mountain of footage that seemed to prove him right. Public tours to the Blue Depths facility increased, and Morgan used his rising platform to speak out against shark culls, calling them species genocide. He positioned himself not just as a scientist, but a peacemaker between two worlds. His charisma drew in donors, volunteers, and media. But beneath the glossy surface of YouTube thumbnails and conference panels, some who knew him began to wonder, was Steve Morgan building a legacy or playing Russian roulette in saltwater? By the final year of Steve Morgan's life, those closest to his work had begun to notice troubling changes, subtle at first, but unmistakable to experienced eyes. Roxy, once hailed as a model of Morgan's theory that trust could tame nature, was changing. She was larger now, heavier in the midsection, and her movements had grown more assertive, even erratic. Divers on the Blue Depths team reported that she had begun circling more tightly around Morgan during divisa behavior, not of affection, but dominance. On 2 occasions, she made physical contact, brushing her powerful shoulder against his chest in what seasoned handlers would recognize as a territorial warning. These weren't playful nudges. To professionals, they were precursors. One visiting vet, brought in to monitor the health of several tagged sharks, noted dental erosion and suspected early signs of internal discomfort, possibly ulcers or parasitic irritation. Combined with hunger, stress, and fluctuating water temperatures, the vet warned the team that Roxy was in a reactive state. Mating season compounded the risk. Tiger sharks are known for behavioral volatility during reproductive shifts, sometimes becoming aggressive without provocation. Concerns mounted. A junior marine biologist emailed Morgan privately, cautioning him that patterns of familiarity could collapse in an instant when instinct took over. "She's not a colleague," they wrote. "She's a hunter. You've just made yourself part of the routine." But Morgan wouldn't budge. In public talks, he continued to describe Roxy as gentle, emotional, even curious. He told reporters that sharks, like dogs, could sense human intent and respond accordingly. His followers believed him, but behind closed doors, tensions in the team reached a breaking point. One senior crew member, an experienced diver named Callum, quit in frustration, leaving a chilling remark during his exit interview. It was like watching a man pet a loaded weapon with the safety off. The week before the fatal dive, Roxy had begun acting out in front of tourists. On a group tour, she aggressively bumped a GoPro-mounted pole held by a cameraman and later struck a buoy line with enough force to snap it. She was seen lunging at a fish bag before it was lowered into the water, a behavior that suggested confusion or impatience. Morgan saw it differently. When confronted by his staff, he shrugged it off. "She's a queen. She knows what she wants." In a post on the Blue Depths Instagram page, he wrote, "When you feed with fear, you get fear back. When you feed with calm, you get peace." He captioned it with a photo of Roxy swimming inches from his bare hand. Admirers called it bravery, colleagues called it denial, and still, he planned his next dive. No cage, no backup. Just him, the open ocean, and the shark he refused to see as a threat. March 8, 2023, began like countless other mornings for Steve Morgan. Clear skies, warm currents, and a meticulously planned solo dive off the crystalline waters of Grand Bahama Island. He was there for what was supposed to be a short, intimate shoot for the Blue Depths Initiative's upcoming fundraising campaign. Just him, a junior crewmate operating the surface camera, a GoPro strapped to his chest, and 2 sealed tubs filled with mackerel and squid. These were the gifts, as Morgan affectionately called them, that Roxy had come to associate with his presence. It was a routine they'd rehearsed dozens of times. She'd circle in, receive a treat, follow a hand signal or two, then glide peacefully back into the blue. Morgan wore no chainmail suit, no protective cage, no reinforced gloves. He believed that was part of the problem, that sharks were only dangerous when treated like monsters. The boat idled quietly as he descended alone into the gentle sway of the shallows, drifting into deeper blue as the cameras rolled. For the first 2 minutes, everything went to plan. Roxy approached slowly from the northwest, her striped flank flashing in the sunlight. She performed a wide, lazy ARCA signal Morgan recognized as a friendly pass. He raised his arm with a fish in hand, and she took it cleanly. But then something shifted. Without warning, she pivoted on her axis, moving faster than she'd ever done in previous dives. With stunning force, she struck Morgan from below, knocking his regulator and mask askew. The GoPro feed captured a violent burst of bubbles, then a blur of movement as Morgan flailed, trying to right himself. The junior team member on the boat shouted down, unsure whether this was part of a new routine or a malfunction. But within seconds, red clouded the water. Roxy had latched onto Morgan's torso, not the hand, not the fish tub, but his rib cage. Experts later called it a test bite, a shark's method of evaluating an unfamiliar object. But this time, she didn't let go. Instead, she began to spin her body, arcing in a powerful corkscrew, as she dragged Morgan downward in a textbook death roll. This maneuver, designed to disorient and incapacitate prey, sent Morgan's limbs spiraling in a violent blur. On the boat, the crew screamed. The surface camera caught a flash of white foam, then nothing. Another shark, a curious juvenile bull, appeared nearby, circling just outside the blood plume. The diver monitoring from above radioed frantically for emergency support, but it was already too late. Morgan never resurfaced. For nearly 2 hours, teams searched the surrounding reef with sonar and submersible drones. When they finally recovered his body from a coral shelf over 30 feet down, the damage was catastrophic. Massive lacerations across the abdomen, a collapsed lung, shredded tissue around the lower ribcage. The man who had spent his life trying to prove sharks could be trusted had been torn apart by the one he trusted most. The footage was confiscated immediately, but rumors of its contents and its haunting final images spread faster than the tide. The aftermath of Steve Morgan's death unfolded with the precision of a natural disaster, sudden, chaotic, and impossible to contain. Within an hour of the emergency call, the dive site was sealed off by Bahamian authorities and marine enforcement officers. The Blue Depths Initiative suspended all operations indefinitely. Roxy, who had fled the scene after the attack, was located 3 miles offshore thanks to a GPS tag affixed years prior. She was darted, subdued, and brought in for a veterinary examination, during which scientists confirmed the presence of human tissue between her serrated teeth and abrasions on her gum, signs of high-force biting and thrashing. Morgan's autopsy confirmed the worst: massive internal hemorrhaging, punctured lungs, and severe trauma to the abdominal cavity. The cause of death was listed as exsanguination and pulmonary collapse due to predatory injury. News of the incident spread globally within 24 hours. The footage, initially confiscated as part of the investigation, was leaked online within a week, its haunting silence and crimson bloom in the water, captivating millions. What followed was a digital maelstrom of grief, anger, and philosophical debate. Animal rights organizations came to Roxy's defense, issuing statements like, "She was behaving like a wild animal because she is one." They insisted that holding her responsible was akin to blaming a lightning strike. Conservationists called for the footage to be a teaching tool, not a spectacle. But others turned their ire toward Morgan himself. Prominent scientists and safety experts condemned his reckless anthropomorphism, arguing that years of portraying Roxy as a friend had dulled his own survival instincts and dangerously misled the public. One expert on CNN remarked, "You don't hug a loaded gun because it didn't fire yesterday." Editorials rolled out with sensational titles devoured by love. When trust kills, the shark that bit the hand that fed her, each more dramatic than the last. The image of Steve Morgan, once a media darling, now became a tragic case study in what happens when admiration turns to delusion. His family, shattered but composed, issued a brief public statement urging continued support for marine conservation, emphasizing that Steve died doing what he loved and that his mission to protect sharks should not be twisted into fear-mongering. Meanwhile, the dive company affiliated with the Blue Depths Initiative came under intense scrutiny. Investigators found that it had failed to enforce multiple safety protocols, including solo dive restrictions and emergency response standards. The company was fined heavily and soon after dissolved entirely. The remaining staff either resigned or transitioned to other organizations. As for Roxy, after 2 weeks of observation, she was released back into the wild, fitted with a new multi-point tracking array and flagged in global marine databases as a reactive subject. Her location is now monitored passively, with interaction prohibited under new ethical diving guidelines. She swims on, unaware of the storm her instincts unleashed. For some, she remains a symbol of misunderstood beauty. For others, a living reminder that nature doesn't keep promises, it keeps balance. In the wake of Steve Morgan's death, a wave of expert analysis flooded scientific journals, news programs, and marine safety forums, each trying to untangle the threads of fascination, familiarity, and fatal error that defined his relationship with Roxy. Marine biologist Dr. Hannah LeClaire, one of the most outspoken voices in the aftermath, was blunt. "We warn against giving sharks pet names. It leads to emotional bias and decreased caution." Her words echoed a growing sentiment among professionals that Morgan's affection for Roxy had crossed a dangerous line from scientific respect into romanticized fantasy. The tiger shark, known for its adaptability and indiscriminate feeding behavior, ranks among the top 3 shark species most likely to be involved in unprovoked attacks on humans, along with great whites and bull sharks. What many forget, experts emphasized, is that these aren't calculated predators, they're instinctive reactors. When startled, confused, or fed in a pattern that links humans to food, their behavior becomes unpredictable and often explosive. Several marine behaviorists pointed out that Morgan's years of hand-feeding Roxy and physically interacting with her, touching her snout, gesturing near her face, even free-diving beside her during her peak hunting hour shad, conditioned the animal in ways that were never fully understood or accounted for. He was mixing variables, one expert explained. She didn't see Steve. She saw a food source, a routine, a stimulus, and something that day broke the pattern. Numerous comparisons were drawn to other infamous cases of human-animal attachment, ending in tragedy. The case of Travis the chimpanzee, who mauled a woman after years of domestic familiarity, and Timothy Treadwell, who was killed by the very grizzly bears he had vowed to protect, were cited often. In each story, there was the same thread: deep emotional connection, repeated warnings, and a final, fatal collapse of illusion. "Nature doesn't sign contracts," said one dive safety official in a televised interview. "She didn't betray him, she remembered what she was." That quote was later shared thousands of times across social media, often overlaying haunting images of Morgan and Roxy in better days. A peer-reviewed case study titled "When Familiarity Breeds Fatality," a review of human apex predator attachments, was published just months after the incident, outlining patterns and fatal outcomes involving highly socialized large predators. The conclusion was stark: the more we try to humanize apex predators, the more blind we become to their instincts. The study noted that trust as a human construct has no meaning in the animal kingdom. Roxy's behavior, from a biological standpoint, was not aberrant. It was expected under the conditions. Yet public sentiment remains divided. While some hail Morgan as a martyr for misunderstood species, others see him as a cautionary example of hubris cloaked in compassion. The experts are clear on one point: understanding predators doesn't mean controlling them. Respect must be rooted not in love but in distance. Because in the end, the moment we forget the difference between bond and biology, we place ourselves in nature's crosshairs where instinct always wins. In the months following Steve Morgan's death, his legacy fractured into competing truths, one born of admiration, the other of alarm. Online, his fans canonized him as a martyr, a fearless ambassador for misunderstood creatures who gave his life in pursuit of coexistence. His Instagram and YouTube pages became digital shrines, flooded with heartfelt comments, tribute videos, and tagged photos of people diving in his name. Yet behind the outpouring of grief, those closest to him wrestled with a more complicated inheritance. His family, once unified in mission, quietly split. Some continued his conservation work under the Blue Depths Initiative, now rebranded with a starker motto: "Respect the wild. Don't tame it." Others, more skeptical, stepped away entirely, privately expressing regret that Steve's methods had strayed so far from caution and scientific protocol. Within the marine biology community, the divide was just as sharp. Some called him a pioneer, others, a cautionary tale dressed in charisma. One marine law specialist noted that Morgan's viral success may have accelerated his downfall. The camera doesn't reward safety. It rewards spectacle. That sentiment echoed through industry conversations as a growing number of YouTube shark influencers came under fire. At least 3 popular channels were demonetized after the incident for violating wildlife policy, accused of staging risky interactions with apex predators for clicks. The ripple effect continued. A new set of ethical predator footage guidelines was quietly adopted across multiple marine organizations, banning direct contact, discouraging feeding footage, and requiring disclaimers on any shark content showing close human interaction. What was once thrilling content was now being scrutinized as potential propaganda, and in the field, change came fast. Dive instructors began invoking Morgan's name during safety briefings, not as a badge of honor, but as a warning. "Remember Steve Morgan," they'd say. "He knew the most and forgot it at the worst time." One veteran diver put it even more bluntly: "The ocean doesn't care who you are. You don't bond with hunger. You survive it." Despite the controversy, Morgan's story remained in circulation, quoted in documentaries, dissected in forums, and replayed in university classrooms. The footage of his final dive, though largely scrubbed from public platforms, became required viewing in several training programs. It is shown now without sound, played at half speed, the soundtrack stripped to silence. In that muted final minute, instructors highlight the posture of the shark, the hand movements, the moment the water shifts from clear to crimson. The site of the attack, just off Grand Bahamas coral shelf, has become an unofficial memorial. A solitary buoy bobs in the tide, anchored by a plaque that reads simply, "He swam with love and was met with truth." Steve Morgan's life was one of passion, purpose, and ultimately, peril. He believed love could overcome nature's edge. Nature reminded him otherwise. His death reframes a haunting question for all who work beside the wild. When does admiration become hubris? When does trust become a fatal illusion? Because sometimes, the sharpest danger isn't in the bite, it's in believing it will never come. The final lesson left by Steve Morgan's life and death has rippled far beyond the waters of Grand Bahama. Today, the raw footage of his last dive is played in marine safety courses around the world, not as spectacle, but as a sobering case study. It runs without sound, stripped of drama, and set to half speed. In the silence, instructors point to the minor details: the arc of Roxy's approach, the exposed flesh of Morgan's hand, the slow bloom of red as nature reasserts itself. No music, no narration, just the brutal poetry of instinct in motion. The site itself, once a vibrant corner of the Blue Depths dive map, is no longer listed in tour brochures. Instead, it exists as a quiet place of reflection. A buoy bobs steadily above the reef, tethered to a weighted plaque on the seafloor that reads, simply, "He believed." She remembered. Visitors sometimes leave tokens dive weights etched with initials, waterproof notes inside jars, but most simply observe from the boat, heads bowed. Morgan's legacy endures as a paradox, a man who fought to defend the wild, and in doing so, forgot that it never needed his affection, only his respect. He built a narrative that captivated millions, one of communion and trust, of bonds forged in saltwater and silence. But in the end, those bonds broke, not out of malice, but instinct. His belief that love could cross the boundary between human and predator was both beautiful and fatally naive. It is a belief many still hold, dangerously reinforced by online videos and pop science documentaries that frame wild animals as misunderstood companions. Experts now warn against this fantasy with renewed urgency. "Admire from a distance," says Dr. Hannah LeClaire. "The wild is not here to bond with you, it's here to survive you." Across the field, policy has shifted. New international guidelines now govern predator interaction, prioritizing distance, minimal feeding, and de-emphasizing personality narratives. The charismatic storytelling Morgan pioneered is now cited as a double-edged sword that raises awareness but dulls danger. And so, the final chapter of his life plays on, frozen in time and tide. In documentaries, it ends not with a scream, but with a quote, "He called her family. She called him food." The screen fades to black, and in the hush that follows, a final voice speaks not with judgment, but with clarity. Because sometimes, the wild doesn't bite out of hatred, it bites out of memory. That is what remains. Not the blood, not the myth, but the warning. That love, when given to something that doesn't understand it, can't protect you. It can only hope to be remembered before it's too late.